There is a shadow that runs through the heart of modern storytelling. It's not the shadow of a vampire, or a ghost, or a slasher. It's a deeper, colder shadow, the shadow of cosmic insignificance. The terrifying idea that we are not just small, but irrelevant in a universe of ancient, uncaring vastness. That shadow has a history. It did not begin with tentacled monsters. It began with a philosophical shudder in the early 20th century, born from the mind of a reclusive New England writer. But it did not end with him. It escaped. It evolved. It infected literature, film, games, and our very culture, mutating into the defining dread of the modern age. Before we begin, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Over the next 2.5 hours, we will trace this chilling lineage. We will start at the source, the Lovecraftian revolution of the 1920s and 30s, the birth of the weird tale, the creation of a pantheon of alien, gods, and the philosophy of cosmic indifferentism that shattered the idea of a benevolent universe. We will follow the shadow as it spreads through the pulp magazines, into the Cold War anxieties of the 1950s, and through the existential literary horror of the latter 20th century. We will watch it be refined by authors like Thomas Ligotti, transformed by filmmakers like John Carpenter, and popularized in games, comics, and online culture. This is not just a history of monsters. It is a history of an idea, the most terrifying idea of the last century, that humanity is adrift in a cosmos that is not only hostile to our life, but hostile to our meaning. So, let us begin at the beginning, in Providence, Rhode Island, in the quiet, haunted mind of Howard Phillips Lovecraft, and follow the shadow all the way to the screen you're watching right now. This is the complete chronicle of cosmic dread. Howard Phillips Lovecraft did not set out to create a mythology. He set out to articulate a very specific kind of dread, one rooted not in morality or the supernatural, but in the implications of scientific materialism. Born in 1890 in Providence, Rhode Island, Lovecraft came of age during a period of profound intellectual upheaval. Darwin's theories had displaced humanity from the center of creation. Einstein's relativity had destabilized notions of absolute space and time. Freud suggested that consciousness itself was not unified or trustworthy. The universe revealed by modern science was vast, ancient, and utterly indifferent to human concerns. Lovecraft absorbed these anxieties deeply. His correspondence reveals a man who identified as a mechanistic materialist, someone who believed the universe operated according to impersonal physical laws, with no divine plan or cosmic justice. This was not a comforting philosophy. In a 1927 letter to Farnsworth Wright, he described his literary project explicitly to evoke a malign and particular suspension or defeat of those fixed laws of nature, which are our only safeguard against the assaults of chaos and the demons of unplumbed space. His stories emerged primarily between 1917 and 1937, published in pulp magazines like Weird Tales. These were not prestige venues. They paid poorly and catered to a niche audience hungry for strange fiction. Yet Lovecraft treated his work with philosophical seriousness. He was constructing what he called cosmic horror, or cosmicism, a mode of fiction premised on the radical insignificance of humanity in a cosmos populated by entities older and more powerful than we could comprehend. The timing matters. The 1920s and 1930s saw the rise of modernist literature, which often explored fragmentation, alienation, and the collapse of traditional meaning. Lovecraft was writing in parallel to Eliot's The Wasteland and Joyce's experiments with consciousness. But where high modernism turned inward to psychology and language, Lovecraft turned outward to the stars. His horror was not psychological, but ontological, a terror born from realizing that reality itself might be fundamentally hostile to human understanding. He died in 1937, largely unknown outside pulp fiction circles. He published no books during his lifetime. His legacy was preserved initially through the efforts of two younger writers, Auguste Derleth and Donald Wandre, who founded Arkham House in 1939, specifically to keep Lovecraft's work in print. Without their intervention, cosmic horror as we know it might not exist. The genre Lovecraft created was almost lost before it began. Cosmic horror did not emerge from nowhere. Lovecraft was synthesizing a tradition that stretched back centuries, drawing on Gothic literature, occult philosophy, and scientific pessimism in equal measure. Understanding his antecedents reveals how carefully he constructed his vision of dread. The most immediate literary influence was Edgar Allan Poe. Lovecraft revered Poe and considered him the master of atmospheric horror. Stories like The Fall of the House of Usher and The Mask of the Red Death demonstrated how to evoke psychological disintegration through environmental decay. Poe's narrators frequently descend into madness, their grip on reality eroding as the story progresses. Lovecraft adopted this structure wholesale, but redirected it. Where Poe's horror was often internal, guilt, obsession, premature burial, Lovecraft's was external. His narrators went mad because they encountered truths too vast for human minds. Arthur Machen provided another crucial template. The Welsh author's stories, particularly The Great God Pan, 1894, and The White People, 1904, depicted ancient pagan forces surviving beneath the surface of modern civilization. Machan's horror was deeply tied to landscape and archaeology. The idea that digging too deeply into the past might unearth something dangerous. Lovecraft borrowed this archaeological anxiety, but expanded its scope. Macon's horrors were earthbound, Celtic, rooted in British soil. Lovecraft's horrors were cosmic, originating in alien dimensions or arriving from distant stars. Lord Dunsany's fantasy work influenced Lovecraft's approach to myth-making. Dunsany created entire pantheons of gods with strange names, Manayud Sushai, the gods of Pagana. These were not allegories or retellings of known myths. They were invented wholesale, presented with absolute conviction. Lovecraft recognized the power of this technique. If you constructed your mythology carefully enough, with sufficient internal consistency and evocative nomenclature, readers would suspend disbelief. They might even begin to wonder whether these gods were entirely fictional. Philosophically, Lovecraft drew heavily from Arthur Schopenhauer and Friedrich Nietzsche, though his engagement was often filtered through popular science writing rather than direct study. Schopenhauer's pessimism, the view that existence is suffering and the universe operates through blind, striving will, resonated deeply with Lovecraft's temperament. Nietzsche's proclamation that God is dead and his exploration of nihilism provided intellectual scaffolding for cosmic horror's central premise, that the universe contains no inherent meaning, and discovering this fact is devastating. The science of Lovecraft's era also shaped his vision. Astronomical discoveries in the early 20th century revealed galaxies beyond the Milky Way, expanding the known universe by orders of magnitude. Suddenly, Earth was not merely peripheral, but infinitesimal. Paleontology unearthed increasingly ancient life forms, pushing back the timeline of terrestrial history and suggesting that human civilization was a recent, fragile accident. theoretical physics introduced concepts, non-Euclidean geometry, higher dimensions, that challenged common-sense notions of space. Lovecraft weaponized these scientific developments. His stories are filled with references to non-Euclidean angles and blasphemous geometries, terms that sound precise but remain deliberately vague. He understood that scientific language could evoke dread precisely because it suggested truths beyond human comprehension. The effect was to make horror feel modern, even inevitable, not a relic of superstition, but a consequence of progress. Lovecraft's mythology succeeds in part because of its linguistic texture. The names he invented, Cthulhu, Azathoth, Nyarlathotep, Yog-Sothoth, have a phonetic strangeness that suggests alien origin. These are not comfortable English words. They resist easy pronunciation, often requiring the reader to pause and sound them out. This difficulty is intentional. It creates a sense that the language itself is contaminated by the entities it describes. The name Cthulhu originated in Lovecraft's 1926 story, The Call of Cthulhu. According to the narrator, it represents the nearest approach to the actual phonetic values of the thing's name. This framing is crucial. The entity's true name cannot be rendered in human speech. What we have is an approximation, a crude translation that inevitably fails. Lovecraft reinforces this throughout the story, noting that different witnesses pronounce it differently, Cthulhu, Cthulhu, and so on. The inconsistency is not a flaw, but a feature. It suggests that human language is inadequate to the task. Other names follow similar patterns. Azathoth combines harsh consonants with an archaic-sounding suffix. Nyarlathotep has a sinuous, almost serpentine quality. Yog-Sothoth repeats the oth sound, creating an incantatory rhythm. Lovecraft was keenly aware of phonetic effects. In his essay, Supernatural Horror in Literature, he praised the cosmic horror of Algernon Blackwood and Arthur Machen, partly for their use of language to evoke the numinous. The symbolic architecture of Lovecraft's mythology is equally deliberate. His pantheon is not organized hierarchically like classical gods or Christian angelology. Instead, it suggests a chaotic, stratified cosmos. The Old Ones, or Great Old Ones, are ancient entities currently imprisoned or dormant. Cthulhu, sleeping in the sunken city of R'lyeh. Hastur, bound in the lake of Hali. The outer gods are more abstract, cosmic forces. Azathoth, the blind idiot god at the center of chaos. Yog-Sothoth, the gate and the key, existing outside normal space-time. This cosmology deliberately inverts religious comfort. There is no benevolent creator, no moral order. The entities that exist are indifferent or hostile. Humanity is not made in their image. We are accidents, our existence so inconsequential that these beings barely notice us. When they do notice, it is catastrophic. Lovecraft also employed what might be called symbolic contamination, the idea that certain knowledge or contact with certain entities leaves permanent marks. Characters who encounter cosmic horrors often suffer physical or mental degradation. They develop strange compulsions, see impossible geometries, or slowly lose their humanity. This is not mere insanity in the clinical sense. It is transformation, a rewriting of the self by contact with something fundamentally incompatible with human consciousness. The famous grimoire, the Necronomicon, functions as the ultimate symbol of forbidden knowledge. Supposedly written by the mad Arab Abdul al-Hazred, it contains rituals, histories, and descriptions of the Old Ones. Lovecraft referenced it across multiple stories, gradually building a consistent mythology around it. Other writers in his circle, Robert E. Howard, Clark Ashton Smith incorporated the book into their own work, creating the illusion of a shared, coherent occult tradition. The Necronomicon became cosmic horror's central symbol, a text that should not exist, containing knowledge that destroys those who read it. Lovecraft's mythology gained traction because he constructed it with meticulous care, layering invented history, faux scholarship, and cross-referencing across stories to create the illusion of authenticity. This was collaborative world-building before the term existed. The technique began with Lovecraft's use of imaginary books. The Necronomicon first appeared in The Hound, 1922, mentioned in passing. By The Dunwich Horror, 1928, it had become central, with Lovecraft providing detailed bibliographic information. Written in Damascus around 730 AD, translated into Greek as Necronomicon by Theodorus Philetas, later rendered in Latin by Olaus Wormius in 1228. These specifics grounded the book in a pseudo-historical context. Lovecraft even invented a publication history, claiming that Dr. John Dee produced an English translation in the 16th century, though most copies were destroyed. Other forbidden texts followed. The Mnacotic manuscripts, supposedly predating human civilization, appeared in Polaris, 1918, and later stories. The Book of Eibon, created by Clark Ashton Smith but adopted by Lovecraft, added another layer. Unaussprechlichen Kulten, roughly unspeakable cults, by Friedrich von Junst, became a recurring reference. Each text reinforced the others, creating a network of occult scholarship that seemed to exist independently of any single story. Lovecraft encouraged other writers to use his invented mythology. Robert E. Howard incorporated references to the Necronomicon and Cthulhu into his stories. Clark Ashton Smith contributed his own entities and grimoires. This collaborative expansion made the mythology feel larger than Lovecraft's personal invention. It suggested a genuine occult tradition that multiple investigators had stumbled upon independently. The narrative strategy also involved what we might call documentary framing. Many Lovecraft stories present themselves as posthumous accounts, scholarly reports, or recovered manuscripts. At the Mountains of Madness, 1936, reads like an Antarctic expedition report. The Shadow, over Innsmouth, 1936, frames itself as a personal testimony. This framing creates distance. We are reading evidence, not experiencing events directly. The effect is to make the fantastic seem documented, archived, potentially real. Lovecraft also employed geographical specificity. He set many stories in a fictionalized New England, creating towns like Arkham, Dunwich, and Innsmouth that nevertheless felt rooted in the region's actual landscape and history. Miskatonic University became the recurring institution where scholars unwisely researched forbidden topics. By grounding his cosmic horrors in recognizable settings, Lovecraft made them feel invasive, ancient alien forces intruding into ordinary American life. The mythology's power also derived from its incompleteness. Lovecraft never systematized his cosmology completely. The relationships between different entities remained vague. The exact nature of Arlaye or the Dreamlands was never fully explained. This ambiguity was strategic. Too much explanation would demystify the horror. By leaving gaps, Lovecraft invited readers to fill them in, to speculate, and in doing so to participate in expanding the mythology. After Lovecraft's death, August Derleth attempted to systematize the mythos, imposing a dualistic structure of good elder gods versus evil old ones. This was not Lovecraft's vision. Lovecraft's cosmos was a moral, not a battleground between good and evil. But Derleth's efforts, however misguided, helped preserve and popularize the mythology. His Arkham House editions kept Lovecraft's work in print and introduced it to new generations of readers who would carry cosmic horror forward into the latter half of the 20th century and beyond. Cosmic horror operates on three interconnected philosophical principles that distinguish it from other modes of frightening fiction. These are not merely thematic flourishes, but foundational axioms that structure how the genre understands reality, consciousness, and meaning itself. The first principle is radical human insignificance. This is not the gentle humility of religious traditions that place humanity below God, but still within a meaningful cosmic order. Lovecraft's insignificance is absolute and annihilating. In his essay, A Confession of Unfaith, 1922, he articulated this position clearly. Human beings are a local disease of the earth, an evolutionary accident with no special status or purpose. His fiction dramatizes this philosophy repeatedly. When characters encounter the old ones or glimpse the true structure of the cosmos, their primary realization is not that they are threatened, but that they are irrelevant. Consider the central revelation of the Call of Cthulhu, that humanity's entire history has occurred during a period when the old ones happen to be sleeping. Our civilizations, religions, and achievements exist only because greater powers have temporarily withdrawn. When the stars align correctly, a phrase Lovecraft uses with astronomical literalism, these entities will return, and human concerns will cease to matter. This is not conquest or apocalypse in the traditional sense. It is displacement, the recognition that we have never been protagonists in our own story. The second principle concerns entropy and cosmic decay. Lovecraft's universe is winding down, collapsing toward disorder. This reflects the second law of thermodynamics, which states that entropy in a closed system always increases. But Lovecraft extends this physical law into metaphysics and even morality. In his cosmos, civilization is fragile, knowledge degrades into madness, and even the gods are subject to decline. Azathoth, the blind idiot god at the center of creation, embodies this perfectly. The ultimate source of reality is mindless, chaotic, utterly without purpose. This entropic vision appears throughout Lovecraft's work. The Color Out of Space, 1927, depicts a meteorite that gradually drains vitality from everything it touches, turning a fertile farm into a blasted heath. The process is irreversible. Nothing can be restored. In The Shadow Out of Time, 1936, the narrator discovers that entire civilizations, human and alien, have risen and fallen in predictable cycles, each one ultimately succumbing to forces beyond their control. Progress is illusion. All complexity eventually dissolves. The third principle involves the instability of reality itself, particularly the suggestion that waking consciousness might be less fundamental than dream states. Lovecraft explored this most thoroughly in his dream cycle stories, but the concept permeates his entire mythology. In The Silver Key, 1926, Randolph Carter discovers that the mundane world is actually less real than the dreamlands he visits in sleep. In Through the Gates of the Silver Key, 1934, co-written with E. Hoffman Price, this premise intensifies. Carter learns he is simultaneously existing across multiple points in time and space, and that his human identity is merely one limited perspective. This destabilization of reality draws on several sources. Berkeley's idealism suggested that material reality exists only as perception. Einstein's relativity demonstrated that time and space are not absolute, but observer-dependent. Lovecraft synthesized these into a horror premise. If reality is not fixed, then the stable world we experience might be a comforting illusion, one that could collapse if we perceived things more accurately. His characters often go mad, not because they hallucinate, but because they begin seeing truly, and truth is incompatible with sanity. These three principles combine to create cosmic horror's distinctive affect. Traditional horror frightens us with threats. The vampire wants our blood. The ghost seeks revenge. The serial killer hunts us. Cosmic horror frightens us with implications. It suggests that the universe operates according to principles that would destroy us if we understood them fully. The threat is not violence, but knowledge. Understanding itself becomes lethal. Lovecraft's pantheon is not a pantheon in the traditional sense. These are not gods who answer prayers or involve themselves in human affairs. They are vast, ancient entities whose existence predates humanity and will likely outlast it. Understanding their nature requires abandoning anthropocentric categories. The great old ones represent the most developed category. Cthulhu, introduced in the 1926 story bearing his name, is described as a massive entity combining features of octopus, dragon, and vaguely anthropoid form. He lies dormant in the sunken city of R'lyeh, somewhere in the South Pacific. The story establishes that Cthulhu and his spawn came to Earth millions of years ago, before human evolution. They built cities of non-Euclidean geometry, architecture that violates the spatial principles our minds evolved to navigate. When the stars aligned incorrectly, R'lyeh sank beneath the waves, and Cthulhu entered a state described as dead but dreaming. This phrase is crucial. Cthulhu is neither alive nor dead by our definitions. He exists in a state outside those categories, still capable of influencing human consciousness through dreams. Sensitive individuals receive telepathic transmissions from R'lyeh, manifesting as nightmares, artistic compulsions, or religious visions. The cult that worships Cthulhu does so not through revelation, but through psychic contamination. They have been infected by contact with an alien intelligence. Yog-Sothoth represents a different order of entity entirely. Described in The Dunwich Horror, 1928, as existing outside the ordered universe, Yog-Sothoth is simultaneously the gate and the key and the guardian of the gate. This paradoxical description suggests an entity that exists in all times and places at once, a being coterminous with space-time itself. Unlike Cthulhu, who has a form and location, Yog-Sothoth is more concept than creature, the living embodiment of cosmic boundary dissolution. Azathoth occupies the center of Lovecraft's cosmos, literally and symbolically. Often called the blind idiot god or the nuclear chaos, Azathoth writhes at the center of ultimate infinity, surrounded by piping flutes. He is creation's source and simultaneously its least conscious element, pure mindless force from which all reality emanates. This inverts theological tradition completely. The ultimate deity is not omniscient and benevolent, but mindless and indifferent. Existence itself derives from chaos, not order. Nyarlathotep differs from these entities by maintaining active engagement with humanity. Called the crawling chaos and described as the messenger of the outer gods, Nyarlathotep appears in various forms across Lovecraft's stories. In Nyarlathotep, 1920, he manifests as a human-like figure, conducting scientific demonstrations that drive audiences mad. In The Haunter of the Dark, 1936, He inhabits a shining trapezohedron. Unlike the other entities, Nyarlathotep seems to deliberately manipulate and corrupt humanity, though his ultimate purposes remain obscure. The Dreamlands entities represent yet another category. The Dreamlands, developed primarily in Lovecraft's earlier fiction, constitute a dimension accessible through dreams. This realm has its own geography, inhabitants, and physical laws. The cats of Ulthar, the Zoogs, and the ghouls are Dreamland's natives, but more powerful beings also dwell there. Nodens, described as relatively benevolent, the other gods who guard certain boundaries, and Nyarlathotep, who appears here as well, serving as a bridge between waking and dreaming realities. What unifies these diverse entities is their fundamental alienness. They do not operate according to human psychology or morality. They are not evil in any meaningful sense. Evil implies intention, and these beings largely lack comprehensible motivation. Cthulhu does not hate humanity. He is simply incompatible with human existence. When Arlia rises and Cthulhu wakes, the destruction that follows will be incidental, a side effect of his return to activity. This incompatibility extends to how these entities are described. Lovecraft frequently resorts to negative definitions. Not quite this, not exactly that. Because human language evolved to describe human-scale phenomena. When narrators attempt to describe what they've seen, their accounts fracture into contradictions and inadequacies. The entities exist in higher dimensions, or according to geometries, that our three-dimensional perception cannot properly register. What we perceive is a cross-section, a shadow, inevitably distorted. In cosmic horror, madness is not metaphorical. It is the predictable consequence of encountering truths for which human consciousness was never designed. Lovecraft's approach to insanity differs fundamentally from its use in Gothic literature or psychological horror. Gothic madness typically emerged from guilt, trauma, or hereditary taint. Poe's narrators going mad from their own crimes, for instance. Psychological horror might depict mental illness as distorting perception, making the unreliable narrator question what is real. Lovecraft inverts this. His narrators go mad because their perception becomes too accurate. They see clearly, and clarity destroys them. The pattern recurs across his major works. In The Call of Cthulhu, the narrator pieces together evidence from multiple sources: police reports, newspaper clippings, his uncle's research notes, and artist's testimony. Each source independently corroborates the existence of Cthulhu and his cult. The narrator's growing horror stems not from delusion, but from synthesis. He assembles scattered data points into a coherent picture, and that picture is unbearable. The story ends with him hoping the various accounts remain unconnected, that others will not perform the same synthesis he did. The color out of space provides a different model. Here, madness arrives through environmental contamination. The meteorite that crashes on the Gardner farm emanates a color that exists outside the visible spectrum, a literal impossibility that nevertheless occurs. The family's descent into insanity parallels their physical deterioration. They see things that cannot be described in human language, experience sensations for which no vocabulary exists. Their madness is not psychological breakdown, but sensory expansion beyond the brain's processing capacity. In At the Mountains of Madness, the Antarctic explorers encounter the ruins of an alien civilization predating humanity by millions of years. The architecture they discover violates Euclidean geometry. Corridors seem to slope up and down simultaneously. Angles are wrong in ways that cannot be articulated precisely. One team member, Danforth glimpses something in the final escape that leaves him catatonic, capable only of repeating fragments of Poe and biblical verse. Whatever he saw exceeded his mind's ability to integrate the experience. This understanding of madness reflects Lovecraft's materialism. He did not believe in souls or supernatural possession. Mental collapse, in his framework, is a purely physical phenomenon. Neurons overwhelmed by incompatible data, brain structures trying to process information they were never evolved to handle. It is cognitive hardware failure, not spiritual corruption. The social dimensions of this madness also matter. Lovecraft's narrators frequently exist in tension with institutional authority. They possess knowledge that cannot be communicated through official channels. In The Shadow over Innsmouth, the narrator escapes the town and attempts to alert federal authorities, who raid Innsmouth and suppress all information about what was found. The narrator himself begins transforming into a deep one, a fish-frog hybrid. His knowledge is both validated and rendered useless. The authorities act but do not explain, and he cannot share what he knows without sounding insane. This creates what might be called epistemic isolation. Characters who encounter cosmic horrors become separated from normal human community. They cannot return to conventional life because they know too much, but they also cannot form new communities around their knowledge because the knowledge itself is corrosive. The cults that worship the old ones are not voluntary associations, but collections of the contaminated, people whose contact with alien intelligence has rewritten their priorities and perceptions. Madness in cosmic horror also functions as a mercy. Several stories suggest that insanity is the mind's defense mechanism against truths it cannot survive understanding. In The Dreams in the Witch House, Walter Gilman studies non-Euclidean calculus and witch lore at Miskatonic University. His mathematical knowledge allows him to perceive higher dimensions, and this perception grants him mobility through space that should be impossible. But each use damages his mind further. Madness, from this perspective, is the mind protecting itself by refusing to integrate what it has learned. The central tragedy of cosmic horror is that curiosity leads to damnation. Knowledge, the supposed virtue of Enlightenment thinking, becomes toxic. This theme appears in Lovecraft's work with remarkable consistency and deserves careful examination. The Necronomicon serves as the ultimate symbol of forbidden knowledge. Across multiple stories, characters who read it suffer predictable consequences. In The Dunwich Horror, Dr. Armitage consults the book to understand the nature of the Whately twins and discovers rituals for summoning Yog-Sothoth. The knowledge allows him to defeat the threat, but the story makes clear this is exceptional. Most readers are destroyed by what they learn. What makes knowledge forbidden in Lovecraft's framework is not moral, transgression. These are not sins against divine law, but ontological incompatibility. The information contained in the Necronomicon or similar texts describes realities that human consciousness was never meant to apprehend. Reading about the old ones does not simply inform you of their existence. It creates a cognitive vulnerability. You become visible to entities that operate partially through mental contact. Knowledge establishes connection, and connection is dangerous. The Whisperer in Darkness, 1931, develops this theme extensively. The protagonist, Albert Wilmarth, corresponds with a Vermont farmer who claims to have evidence of alien creatures living in the hills. The farmer sends Wilmarth photographs, recordings, and physical specimens. Each piece of evidence is compelling. Wilmarth, an academic folklorist, initially approaches the material skeptically, but becomes convinced through accumulated proof. When he finally visits the farmhouse, he discovers too late that the I-O correspondence has been a trap, that the farmer's identity was stolen, and that the aliens have been manipulating him through his own curiosity. The story's horror emerges from Wilmarth's realization that epistemic methods, evidence gathering, rational analysis, peer review, provide no protection against entities that can manipulate those very processes. The photographs were genuine, the recordings were authentic, the physical specimens were real. All of Wilmarth's careful scholarship led him correctly to true conclusions, and those true conclusions led him into danger. Epistemology itself becomes a trap. This represents a profound challenge to Enlightenment values. The scientific method assumes that knowledge is beneficial, that understanding reality leads to human flourishing. Lovecraft's fiction systematically undermines this assumption. In From Beyond, 1934, a scientist builds a machine that stimulates the pineal gland, allowing perception of entities existing just outside normal sensory range. These entities have always been present, moving through and around us, but invisible. The machine grants sight, and sight is catastrophic. The entities can perceive the scientist once he perceives them, and they devour him. The archaeological motif appears repeatedly in this context. At the Mountains of Madness frames its horror explicitly as an expedition gone wrong. The scientists drilling in Antarctica discover a mountain range taller than the Himalayas, containing cities millions of years old. Their exploration uncovers the history of the Elder Things, an alien race that created life on Earth as an experiment. The more the explorers learn, the more their understanding of human history collapses. We are not creation's pinnacle, but a contingent byproduct, and the civilizations we consider ancient are infantile compared to what preceded them. This archaeological anxiety connects to early 20th century concerns about historical time. Discoveries in geology and paleontology kept pushing back the age of the Earth, dwarfing human history. Lovecraft weaponized this. His stories suggest that if we dig deep enough, literally or metaphorically, we will discover that our position in cosmic history is even more marginal than we feared. The epistemic collapse that follows forbidden knowledge is often irreversible. Characters cannot unknow what they have learned. In The Shadow Out of Time, Nathaniel Peaslee experiences 5 years of amnesia, during which an alien intelligence inhabits his body. When he recovers, he has fragmentary memories of an ancient Australian city built by the great race of Yith. Years later, he joins an archaeological expedition to Australia and discovers the very city he remembered. The final revelation is that his memories are accurate. The alien consciousness was real, the possession genuine, and this confirmation destroys any possibility of dismissing his experience as delusion. He is trapped forever in the knowledge of what happened to him. Cosmic horror did not emerge fully formed in a single story. Lovecraft developed his methodology gradually between 1917 and 1926, refining techniques and building a mythological infrastructure that would eventually cohere into what we now recognize as the Cthulhu mythos. Tracing these early manifestations reveals a deliberate artistic evolution. Dagon, written in 1917 and published in 1919, represents Lovecraft's first sustained attempt at cosmic horror. The story is brief, a morphine addict's written account before his suicide. He describes being shipwrecked on a volcanic upheaval in the Pacific, finding a massive monolith carved with hieroglyphics and depicting human-fish hybrids worshipping something larger. He witnesses one of these creatures emerge from the water. The narrative ends with him back in civilization, haunted by dreams and the conviction that the creature is searching for him. The story contains several elements that would become canonical: the oceanic setting, the testimony of a doomed narrator, the ancient monument suggesting civilizations predating humanity, and the persistent mental contamination following encounter. But Dagon lacks the mythological architecture of later work. The creature remains unnamed beyond the biblical reference. There is no network of texts or cults, no suggestion of a broader cosmic order. The Nameless City, 1921, advances the methodology significantly. Here, an explorer in the Arabian desert discovers ruins older than any known civilization, populated by the mummified remains of reptilian creatures. The city descends deep underground, and in its lowest chamber, the narrator encounters the still living descendants of the race that built it. The story introduces the couplet that would become Lovecraft's most frequently quoted lines: "That is not dead which can eternal lie, and with strange aeons even death may die." This verse, attributed to the mad Arab Abdul al-Hazred, marks the first reference to what would become the Necronomicon. The significance of this innovation cannot be overstated. By attributing forbidden knowledge to a specific text and author, Lovecraft created infrastructure for future stories. He could reference the Necronomicon again, building consistency across narratives. Other writers could incorporate it, creating the illusion of an independent occult tradition. The book became cosmic horror's central connective tissue. The Hound, 1922, provided the Necronomicon's first sustained appearance. Two decadent grave robbers steal an amulet from a tomb and are subsequently hunted by a supernatural hound. When they consult the Necronomicon for protection, they discover references to a cult that worshipped beings from beyond death. The story is juvenilia by Lovecraft's later standards, overly gothic, derivative, but it established the grimoire as a research tool, something characters consult when confronted with inexplicable phenomena. The Festival, 1923, deepened the mythological connections. Set in Kingsport, Massachusetts during the winter solstice, it depicts a family reunion that reveals itself as a gathering of undead cult members. The narrator discovers they worship entities dwelling beneath the earth, accessed through subterranean passages. The story references both the Necronomicon and another invented text, the Pnakotic manuscripts. It also establishes Lovecraft's practice of setting cosmic horror in fictionalized New England towns, Kingsport, Arkham, Dunwich, creating a geography where the weird could intrude into the familiar. The Dream Cycle stories, written primarily between 1919 and 1927, developed in parallel. Polaris, 1918, The Cats of Ulthar, 1920, Celiphaze, 1920, and The Quest of Irainen, 1921, constructed a shared dream realm with consistent geography and mythology. These stories differ tonally from Lovecraft's cosmic horror proper. They are more lyrical, less materialist. But they contributed important concepts. The idea that dream realms might be as ontologically substantial as waking reality would later merge with cosmic horror in stories like The Dream Quest of Unknown Kadath, 1927, and The Silver Key, 1926. Cross-referencing between stories accelerated after 1926. When The Call of Cthulhu appeared, it referenced not only the Necronomicon, but also invented academic journals, police reports, and newspaper accounts. Later stories would reference Cthulhu, creating a network of textual validation. By the time Lovecraft wrote The Dunwich Horror, 1928. He could reference Miskatonic University, the Necronomicon, several established entities, and assume readers would recognize these elements from previous stories. The collaborative dimension proved equally important. Robert E. Howard, primarily known for Conan the Barbarian, incorporated Lovecraftian elements into stories like The Black Stone, 1931, and The Children of the Night, 1931. Clark Ashton Smith set many stories in Hyperborea and Atlantis, but integrated references to Lovecraft's mythology. These writers corresponded regularly, sharing mythological elements and creating deliberate continuity across their work. This collaborative expansion served a specific function. It made the mythology seem discovered rather than invented. When multiple independent authors reference the same forbidden texts and entities, it created the impression that they were all drawing from a genuine occult tradition. Readers encountering Lovecraft through the pulp magazines might not initially realize these authors were coordinating deliberately. The effect was to make cosmic horror feel like revelation rather than fiction. The Call of Cthulhu, published in Weird Tales in February 1928, represents the first fully realized cosmic horror narrative and remains Lovecraft's most influential single work. Examining its structure reveals how carefully he constructed the story to maximize philosophical dread while maintaining narrative momentum. The story opens with its most famous declaration. The most merciful thing in the world, I think, is the inability of the human mind to correlate all its contents. This sentence establishes the central premise immediately, that human ignorance is protective, that understanding would be catastrophic. The narrator, Francis Wayland Thurston, explains that he has inherited papers from his grand uncle, George Gamble Angel, a professor of Semitic languages at Brown University. Angel died mysteriously after investigating strange occurrences worldwide. Thurston has now assembled these papers and made connections his uncle did not live to complete. The narrative proceeds through 3 interlocking testimonies, each apparently independent, each corroborating the others. This structure is crucial. Lovecraft understood that cosmic horror required evidential weight. A single witness might be dismissed as delusional, but multiple independent accounts pointing toward the same conclusion become harder to ignore. The first account concerns a sculptor named Henry Anthony Wilcox, who, in 1925, brought Angel a clay bas-relief depicting a grotesque entity and strange hieroglyphics. Wilcox explained he had been experiencing vivid dreams of cyclopean cities and a voice chanting Cthulhu Eftaren. During the same period, sensitive individuals worldwide, artists, poets, the mentally unstable, experienced similar nightmares. Angel documented 17 cases across different continents, all describing comparable imagery and occurring during the same 2-week period in March 1925. The second account, discovered in Angel's files, dated from 1908. A New Orleans police inspector named John Raymond LaGrasse had participated in a raid on a swamp cult practicing human sacrifice. The cultists, when interrogated, described worshiping Great Cthulhu and chanted the same phrases Wilcox would later report. They possessed a statuette matching Wilcox's bas-relief in every detail. LaGrasse brought the statuette to a meeting of the American Archaeological Society, where several scholars recognized similar imagery from investigations in Greenland, Iceland, and other remote locations. The cult, it appeared, was global and ancient. The third account provides the story's climax. Thurston discovers a newspaper clipping about a Norwegian sailor named Gustav Johansen, who survived a mysterious incident at sea in 1925, the same March period when the dreams occurred. Thurston tracks down Johansen's widow and obtains his manuscript. Johansen's ship encountered a derelict yacht crewed by cultists attempting to reach a specific coordinate in the South Pacific. After a violent confrontation, Johansen and a companion pursued the yacht to its destination and discovered an island that should not exist. R'lyeh, risen temporarily from the ocean floor. Johansen's description of R'lyeh reveals Lovecraft's technique at its most effective. He avoids concrete detail, instead emphasizing geometrical wrongness. Without angles that were angles, built according to principles that hurt the eye. The city's architecture seems to shift perspective, with vertical surfaces appearing horizontal and vice versa. This impossible geometry creates visceral disorientation in the reader, suggesting realities that human perception cannot properly register. When Cthulhu himself emerges from the temple, Johansen's description remains deliberately imprecise. A mountain walked or stumbled, something with a pulpy tentacled head, a scaly body, prodigious claws, and long, narrow wings. The vagueness is intentional. Lovecraft understood that the imagination generates more effective horror than explicit description. By providing only impressionistic details, he allows each reader to construct their own version of Cthulhu, one tailored to their particular anxieties. The entity pursues the fleeing sailors. Johansen, in desperation, rams his ship into Cthulhu. The creature's body explodes into a gelatinous green immensity, then reforms. This detail is philosophically significant. Cthulhu is not vulnerable to physical violence because he does not operate according to physical laws as we understand them. The ramming merely disperses his form temporarily. He is neither alive nor dead in any conventional sense, and therefore cannot be killed. The story concludes with Thurston's recognition that Cthulhu will return when the stars are right again. The cosmic alignment that allowed R'lyeh to surface was temporary. Cthulhu has returned to his death sleep. The city has sunk again, and humanity remains ignorant. Thurston himself debates whether to destroy the evidence or preserve it. He suspects he will die as mysteriously as his uncle, killed by cultists or by forces he cannot specify. The final paragraphs express hope that no one else will correlate the information as he has. The story's power derives from several strategic choices. First, the fragmented narrative creates the impression of objective investigation. We are assembling evidence, not experiencing events directly. Second, the multiple independent corroborations, dreams, cults, the island itself, make denial difficult. Third, the ultimate revelation confirms insignificance rather than threat. Cthulhu does not hunt humanity. He barely acknowledges our existence. We matter so little that our survival depends on cosmic accidents of stellar alignment. The Call of Cthulhu established templates that would define cosmic horror for decades. The research narrative, the global cult, the sunken city, the entity that predates and will outlast humanity, and the knowledge that destroys those who possess it. At the Mountains of Madness, written in 1931 and published serially in Astounding Stories in 1936, represents Lovecraft's most ambitious narrative and his fullest articulation of cosmic horror's philosophical implications. The novella runs approximately 40,000 words and adopts the form of a scientific report meant to dissuade future Antarctic exploration. The narrator, William Dyer, is a geologist at Miskatonic University who led an expedition to Antarctica in 1930 to 1931. He writes retrospectively, attempting to prevent a follow-up expedition by revealing what his team discovered. This framing immediately establishes tension. Dyer possesses knowledge he desperately wants to suppress, but feels obligated to share it under specific circumstances. The story becomes a careful calibration of how much truth can be safely disclosed. The expedition's early discoveries follow realistic scientific protocols. They drill core samples, map terrain, and collect specimens. When they discover fossils unlike anything in the known paleontological record, their excitement is professional and measured. The creatures, eventually identified as the Elder Things, appear to be barrel-shaped organisms with starfish-like heads, multiple appendages, and complex internal structures. Carbon dating suggests they are at least 600 million years old, predating all complex life currently known. The discovery of a massive mountain range exceeding the Himalayas in height escalates the narrative. Beyond these mountains, the team finds a sprawling city of megalithic stone construction, its architecture suggesting non-human builders. The buildings incorporate those same non-Euclidean angles Lovecraft had been developing across multiple stories. Corridors seem to slope impossibly, and doorways exist at orientations that defy three-dimensional logic. What distinguishes this story from earlier Lovecraft work is the extensive middle section devoted to decoding the city's history through bas-relief carvings. Dyer and his companion, Danforth, spend considerable time examining these carvings, which tell the complete history of the Elder Things. This is cosmic horror as archaeology, the systematic recovery of knowledge that should have remained buried. The carvings reveal that the Elder Things arrived on Earth during the Precambrian era, established cities in the Antarctic when the climate was temperate, and created all terrestrial life through biological experimentation. Humanity is their descendant, not directly, but through evolutionary lineages they initiated. The carvings also depict their conflicts with other alien races, the polyps that served them initially, the mygo, which Lovecraft had introduced in The Whisperer in Darkness, and most significantly, the Shoggoths. The Shoggoths represent the story's central horror. They were artificially created by the Elder Things as slave labor, protoplasmic entities capable of forming any organs or appendages necessary for their tasks. Over millions of years, the Shoggoths developed rudimentary intelligence and eventually rebelled. The bas-reliefs show a protracted war between the Elder Things and their creations, a conflict that devastated the Antarctic civilization. This rebellion serves multiple thematic functions. It echoes Frankenstein and other narratives about creations turning against their makers, but extends the time frame to geological scales. It also suggests a cyclical pattern. The Elder Things created Shoggoths, who overthrew them. The Elder Things created the evolutionary lineage leading to humanity. The implication hovers unspoken. What might humanity create that will eventually supplant us? The horror escalates when Dyer and Danforth discover that some Elder Things survived into relatively recent times, maintaining a diminished city even as the ice sheets advanced. More critically, they realize that Shoggoths also survived, dwelling in subterranean waters beneath the city. The creatures remain as dangerous as they were millions of years ago. The climactic sequence occurs when the explorers, fleeing through the city, encounter a living Shoggoth. Lovecraft's description emphasizes formlessness and sensory assault, a terrible, indescribable thing, a shapeless congeries of protoplasmic bubbles, emitting a sound like "tekelili," the same phrase famously used in Poe's The Narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym. This direct reference to Poe is not coincidental. Lovecraft deliberately connects his Antarctic horror to literary precedent, suggesting that Poe intuited truths about the polar regions without fully understanding them. Danforth glimpses something beyond the city as they escape, something even more terrible than the Shoggoth. He becomes partially catatonic, capable only of fragmentary utterances mixing Poe quotations and references to Yog-Sothoth and the Necronomicon. Lovecraft never explicitly reveals what Danforth saw, maintaining ambiguity at the story's conclusion. The philosophical implications of "At the Mountains of Madness" exceed those of earlier stories. First, it establishes that human evolution was not natural, but engineered, eliminating any sense of organic development or divine creation. We are experimental byproducts. Second, it demonstrates that civilizations incomparably more advanced than ours have risen and fallen, leaving barely any trace. The Elder Things possessed interstellar travel and biological mastery, yet they declined into extinction. Third, it suggests that knowledge accumulation does not lead to safety or transcendence, but to vulnerability. The Elder Things' scientific achievements created the Shoggoths that destroyed them. The story also inverts cosmic horror's typical emotional trajectory. When Dyer and Danforth first examine the Elder Things' bodies, they react with scientific fascination. As they decode the city's history, however, their response shifts to something resembling sympathy. The Elder Things were not malevolent. They built a civilization, created art, and struggled against forces beyond their control. They were, in their way, comprehensible. The true horror lies not in these ancient aliens, but in what destroyed them and what might still lurk in Antarctic depths. Lovecraft's death in 1937 could have ended cosmic horror as a coherent tradition. Instead, his mythology entered a period of contested expansion, shaped primarily by August Derleth, but involving dozens of writers who interpreted, systematized, and sometimes fundamentally altered Lovecraft's original vision. Derleth had corresponded with Lovecraft extensively and inherited his literary estate. In 1939, he and Donald Wandre founded Arkham House specifically to preserve Lovecraft's work in book form. The first volume, The Outsider and Others, 1939, collected Lovecraft's most significant stories and introduced many readers to his work who had never encountered the pulp magazines. Without Arkham House, Lovecraft might have remained an obscure pulp writer, his stories scattered across deteriorating magazines. However, Derleth's editorial choices and his own fiction significantly reshaped the mythos. His most consequential intervention was imposing a dualistic moral structure. In stories like The Lurker at the Threshold, 1945, which he completed from Lovecraft's fragmentary notes, and in original works like The Trail of Cthulhu, 1944, Derleth introduced the concept of elder gods, benevolent cosmic forces opposed to the malevolent old ones. This created a cosmic battle between good and evil entirely foreign to Lovecraft's vision. Lovecraft's cosmos was amoral. The entities he described were neither good nor evil, but simply indifferent, operating according to motivations incomprehensible to humanity. Derleth's systematization made cosmic horror more palatable and narratively conventional. There were heroes and villains, battles and victories. This arguably made the mythology more accessible, but fundamentally undermined its philosophical foundation. Cosmic horror's power derived precisely from the absence of moral structure, from the recognition that the universe contained no justice or meaning. Derleth also attempted to organize the entities into elemental categories. Cthulhu became associated with water, Hastur with air, and so forth. This taxonomic impulse imposed order on what Lovecraft had deliberately kept ambiguous and chaotic. Where Lovecraft suggested vast, incomprehensible forces, Derleth created a comprehensible system. Many later scholars and writers have criticized these changes, arguing that Derleth preserved Lovecraft's work physically while corrupting it conceptually. Other collaborators took different approaches. Robert Bloch, who had corresponded with Lovecraft as a teenager, wrote numerous stories incorporating Lovecraftian elements while maintaining his own voice. The Shambler from the Stars, 1935, and The Shadow from the Steeple, 1950, referenced the Necronomicon and cosmic entities, but focused on psychological horror and human corruption. Bloch later became famous for Psycho, 1959. But his early weird fiction demonstrated how Lovecraft's mythology could be adapted without slavish imitation. Clark Ashton Smith's relationship to the mythos was more peripheral. Smith created his own mythological cycles, Hyperborea, Atlantis, Zothique, but occasionally incorporated Lovecraftian references as courtesies between friends. His prose style differed markedly from Lovecraft's, being more ornate and aesthetically oriented. Smith proved that cosmic horror's basic premises, indifferent cosmos, forbidden knowledge, human insignificance, could be expressed through different literary techniques. Frank Belknap Long, another correspondent, contributed stories like The Hounds of Tindalos, 1929, which introduced entities existing in the angles of time rather than its curves. This concept became widely adopted in later cosmic horror, demonstrating how collaborative expansion could genuinely innovate rather than merely repeat Lovecraft's formulations. The 1960s and 1970s saw cosmic horror spread beyond Lovecraft's immediate circle. Colin Wilson's The Ichi-A, Mind Parasites, 1967, and The Philosopher's Stone, 1969, engaged seriously with Lovecraft's philosophical premises while introducing new metaphysical frameworks. Wilson suggested that human consciousness evolution itself might provoke confrontation with cosmic entities threatened by our potential. This inverted Lovecraft's pessimism. Perhaps humanity could develop capacity to comprehend or even resist cosmic forces. Ramsey Campbell began writing Lovecraftian fiction as a teenager, initially setting stories in Lovecraft's New England. Lovecraft himself had encouraged Campbell shortly before his death, suggesting the young British writer develop his own locales. Campbell's mature work, set in the Severn Valley, demonstrated how cosmic horror could be transplanted geographically while maintaining its essential character. Stories like The Inhabitant of the Lake, 1964, and later novels like The Doll Who Ate His Mother, 1976, showed cosmic horror adapting to British settings and sensibilities. Brian Lumley's Titus Crow series, beginning with The Burrowers Beneath, 1974, took a more adventurous approach. Lumley created protagonists who actively fought the Old Ones using occult knowledge and elder god assistance. Essentially, Derleth's dualism transformed into pulp adventure. These novels proved commercially successful and introduced Lovecraftian mythology to readers who might have found Lovecraft's own prose too dense or his philosophy too bleak. The Chaosium role-playing game Call of Cthulhu, released in 1981, represented another form of expansion. The game codified Lovecraft's entities with statistics and rules, making cosmic horror interactive. Players created investigators who researched occult mysteries and inevitably confronted sanity-destroying revelations. The game's sanity mechanic, where characters permanently lose mental stability as they gain knowledge, perfectly captured cosmic horror's central equation. Call of Cthulhu introduced Lovecraft to audiences who might never read his stories, and it remains in print decades later. By the 1980s, Lovecraftian cosmic horror had become a recognized tradition within genre fiction, subject to both reverent homage and deliberate subversion. Writers could reference the Necronomicon or Cthulhu with reasonable confidence that readers would recognize the allusions. This widespread recognition, however, created new problems. Cosmic horror's familiarity began undermining its effectiveness. How could Cthulhu remain terrifying when he appeared on T-shirts and in cartoons? The boundary between Lovecraft's deliberate fiction and purported reality began eroding almost immediately after his death, creating a unique phenomenon in literary history, a mythology so carefully constructed that readers, and sometimes even scholars, mistook it for genuine occult tradition. This confusion was not accidental, but built into cosmic horror's design from the beginning. The Necronomicon presents the most striking case. Lovecraft invented the book entirely, providing it with increasingly detailed bibliographic information across multiple stories. He described its author, Abdul al-Hazred, as a mad Arab poet from Damascus who lived around 700 CE and was devoured by invisible monsters in broad daylight. He specified translations into Greek by Theodorus Philetus in 950 CE, into Latin by Olaus Wormius in 1228. He even claimed that Dr. John Dee produced an English translation in the 16th century, though most copies were destroyed. These details created verisimilitude. When readers encountered references to the Necronomicon across multiple stories by different authors, Lovecraft, Howard, Bloch, the consistency suggested authenticity. The bibliographic precision made it seem researched rather than invented. Libraries began receiving inquiries about the book. The Widener Library at Harvard reportedly posted a notice explaining the Necronomicon did not exist after fielding too many requests. This confusion intensified in subsequent decades. In 1973, Owlswick Press published a version of the Necronomicon claiming to be a translation of the original text. The editor, Simon, presented it as a genuine grimoire that blended Sumerian mythology with Lovecraftian elements. The book sold widely, particularly within occult communities. Many purchasers apparently believed they were acquiring authentic forbidden knowledge. The Simon Necronomicon remains in print and has spawned numerous imitators, each claiming varying degrees of authenticity. Other hoax editions followed. In 1978, George Hay edited a version allegedly based on the cipher manuscript of Dr. John Dee. In 2004, Donald Tyson published a complete Necronomicon presented as his translation from Dee's original. These texts vary wildly in content. The Simon version draws heavily on Mesopotamian mythology, while Tyson's incorporates ceremonial magic traditions. But all exploit the cultural authority Lovecraft's careful world-building had established. The phenomenon extends beyond grimoires. Urban legends emerged claiming that Lovecraft's stories were fictionalized accounts of genuine experiences. Internet forums devoted to paranormal topics regularly feature discussions about whether Cthulhu or the Old Ones might actually exist. Some participants argue that Lovecraft accessed genuine occult knowledge through dreams or ancestral memory, then disguised it as fiction for protection. This theory requires ignoring Lovecraft's extensive correspondence where he explicitly discussed inventing his mythology, but such evidence rarely dissuades committed believers. The town of Arkham acquired particular significance in this context. Lovecraft based it loosely on Salem, Massachusetts, but treated it as fictional. Nevertheless, occultists and Lovecraft enthusiasts have attempted to locate real Arkham, proposing various Massachusetts towns as the actual model. Some claim to have visited locations matching Lovecraft's descriptions, experienced supernatural phenomena, or discovered evidence of the cults he described. These accounts ignore the obvious explanation that Lovecraft drew on New England's general architectural and geographical features rather than documenting specific locations. Innsmouth presents a similar case. The shadow over Innsmouth describes a decaying Massachusetts coastal town whose residents have interbred with fish-frog hybrids called deep ones. The story provides detailed geography and history. Tourist websites now offer Innsmouth tours, visiting locations in Newburyport and other towns that supposedly inspired Lovecraft. Some participants claim to sense lingering wrongness in these locations, reporting feelings of unease, or glimpsing suspicious individuals who might be Deep One hybrids. The fact that these are provably fictional constructs rarely dampens enthusiasm. The Miskatonic University phenomenon deserves particular attention. Lovecraft's fictional institution in Arkham became so well developed across multiple stories that readers began treating it as real. The university supposedly houses the world's most complete collection of occult texts, including the only complete copy of the Necronomicon in the Western Hemisphere. Its faculty regularly investigate supernatural occurrences. Academic hoaxes have emerged, claiming affiliation with Miskatonic, and several individuals have produced fake diplomas or faculty credentials. These hoaxes reveal something profound about cosmic horror's cultural penetration. Lovecraft constructed his mythology so meticulously, with such attention to realistic detail and cross-referencing, that the usual markers distinguishing fiction from reality became ambiguous. His stories read like documentary accounts. They cite sources, provide dates, and maintain internal consistency. When multiple authors referenced the same elements, the effect was collaborative authentication. The mythology seemed to exceed any single author's invention. The internet dramatically accelerated this blurring. Websites devoted to the real Necronomicon proliferate. YouTube features videos allegedly showing Cthulhu sightings or Deep One encounters. These range from obvious jokes to productions that maintain complete earnestness, making distinguishing satire from genuine belief increasingly difficult. Creepypasta, internet horror fiction presented as true accounts, frequently incorporates Lovecraftian elements, further muddying the waters. The SCP Foundation, a collaborative writing project beginning in 2008, demonstrates cosmic horror's methodological influence. The project catalogs anomalous objects in clinical, bureaucratic language, treating impossible entities and artifacts as subjects for containment and study. Many SCP entries directly reference Lovecraftian concepts or aesthetics. The project's documentary tone, incident reports, experiment logs, containment, procedures, echoes Lovecraft's narrative strategies. It proves that his technique of presenting the impossible as documented fact remains productive for generating horror. Conspiracy theories have also absorbed Lovecraftian imagery. Online communities devoted to ancient aliens, hidden civilizations, and occult conspiracies frequently reference the Old Ones, R'lyeh, or Antarctica's supposed secrets. The conspiracy theory that Nazi expeditions to Antarctica discovered alien ruins or entrances to Hollow Earth directly parallels At the Mountains of Madness. Some conspiracy theorists cite Lovecraft's stories as evidence, arguing that he was revealing genuine secrets through fictional camouflage. This cultural afterlife represents cosmic horror's most peculiar achievement. Lovecraft created a mythology so compelling that segments of the population chose to believe in it, despite overwhelming evidence of its fictional origins. The phenomenon suggests something about human psychology, specifically our attraction to narratives that make existence feel more meaningful, even when that meaning is terrifying. Cosmic horror proposes that reality is stranger and more frightening than conventional understanding suggests. For some, this premise proves more satisfying than mundane materialism, even though Lovecraft himself was arguing for precisely that mundane materialism. Cosmic horror's migration from literature into other media has been uneven and revealing. The genre's core principles, radical insignificance, incomprehensible entities, knowledge as corruption, resist straightforward adaptation. Visual media, in particular, struggles with cosmic horror's reliance on suggestive vagueness and narrative deferral. Early film adaptations largely failed to capture Lovecraft's vision. The Haunted Palace, 1963, despite taking its title from Poe, loosely adapted The Case of Charles Dexter Ward. Director Roger Corman and star Vincent Price delivered competent Gothic horror, but the film treats Lovecraft's material as conventional supernatural revenge rather than cosmic dread. The protagonist's possession by his ancestor becomes a moral conflict between good and evil, precisely the framework Lovecraft avoided. The film works as period horror, but abandons cosmic horror's philosophical foundations. Die Monster, Die, 1965, adapted from The Color Out of Space, similarly reduced cosmic horror to conventional monster movie frameworks. The color becomes visible radiation, rather than an impossible spectrum beyond human perception. The gradual contamination and transformation Lovecraft described becomes generic mutation. The film includes none of the original story's sense that the affected family perceives realities incompatible with sanity. It is science fiction horror, not cosmic horror. John Carpenter's The Thing, 1982, though not a direct Lovecraft adaptation, better captures cosmic horror's essential qualities. The film depicts an Antarctic research station infiltrated by an alien organism that perfectly imitates and absorbs other life forms. The creature's nature remains fundamentally unknowable. We never learn its origins, motivations, or ultimate capabilities. It violates biological categories, existing in states between life and non-life. The paranoia it generates among the researchers, the recognition that identity itself becomes unstable, echoes cosmic horror's destabilization of ontological certainty. Carpenter explicitly acknowledged Lovecraft's influence. The Antarctic setting directly references At the Mountains of Madness, though the narrative differs completely. More importantly, the film maintains cosmic horror's commitment to the unknowable. The Thing is never fully explained or rendered comprehensible. It remains alien in the deepest sense, fundamentally incompatible with human categories of understanding. In the Mouth of Madness, 1994, another Carpenter film, engages more directly with Lovecraftian themes. An insurance investigator searches for a missing horror novelist whose books seem to be driving readers insane. Reality progressively breaks down as the investigator realizes he might be a character in the novelist's final manuscript. The film explores cosmic horror's epistemological collapse, the terrifying possibility that what we consider reality is actually fictional, authored by forces we cannot comprehend. The film's ending, with the protagonist laughing maniacally in a theater as he watches his own story unfold on screen, perfectly captures cosmic horror's ultimate revelation: that comprehension itself is impossible, and sanity is merely ignorance. The Resurrected, 1991, directed by Dan O'Bannon, adapted The Case of Charles Dexter Ward more faithfully than Corman's attempt. O'Bannon understood that Lovecraft's horror derived from gradual revelation and physical transformation. The film depicts Charles Dexter Ward's possession by his ancestor Joseph, Kerwin through biological research into essential salts that allow resurrection of the dead. The creature effects, showing partially formed humans emerging from chemical compounds, effectively visualize Lovecraft's body horror. However, the film's limited budget and troubled production prevented it from reaching wide audiences. Color Out of Space, 2019, directed by Richard Stanley and starring Nicolas Cage, represents perhaps the most successful Lovecraft adaptation to date. The film updates the setting to contemporary rural Massachusetts, but maintains the original story's core. A meteorite emanates an indescribable color that gradually transforms the affected family and landscape. Stanley embraces psychedelic visuals to suggest the impossible color, uses body horror to depict transformation, and crucially resists explaining what the phenomenon is or wants. The family's disintegration is environmental, inevitable, and meaningless. They are not being punished or tested, but simply absorbed by something utterly indifferent to their existence. Video games have proven more hospitable to cosmic horror than film, primarily because interactivity allows designers to emphasize player helplessness and epistemic uncertainty in ways passive media cannot. Eternal Darkness, Sanity's Requiem, 2002, for GameCube incorporated a sanity meter that depleted as players encountered horrific entities. As sanity decreased, the game reality itself became unstable. The screen would appear to malfunction, save files would claim to be deleted, the character's head might fall off, only to reveal these were hallucinations. This mechanic perfectly translated Lovecraft's concept that encountering cosmic truth damages consciousness itself. Bloodborne, 2015, developed by From Software, presents the most sophisticated game engagement with cosmic horror. Initially appearing as gothic horror in a plague-ravaged Victorian city, the game progressively reveals that the plague and the beasts it creates are merely symptoms of humanity's contact with entities called Great Ones. These beings exist partially outside normal reality and dimensions. The more the player character learns about the true nature of the plague, the more insight they gain. But higher insight reveals previously invisible creatures and changes game reality. Knowledge becomes both necessary for progression and actively dangerous. The game's revelation structure mirrors Lovecraft's narrative strategies. Early encounters suggest conventional horror, werewolves, mob violence, religious fanaticism. Gradually, the cosmic scope becomes apparent. The city of Yharnam exists in a kind of dream reality. The Great Ones are attempting to reproduce and see humans as potential surrogates for their offspring. The good ending has the player character transform into an infant Great One, transcending humanity entirely. This is presented not as victory, but as metamorphosis into something alien and incomprehensible. Sunless Sea, 2015, and its sequel, Sunless Skies, 2019, construct entire game worlds around cosmic horror principles. Set in a subterranean ocean beneath Victorian London, These games treat sanity and knowledge as interconnected resources. Discovering secrets about the game world increases terror, which can lead to madness and death, but also unlocks new narrative possibilities. The games embrace narrative ambiguity. Multiple stories contradict each other, and no single interpretation is confirmed as correct. This replicates cosmic horror's epistemic instability in game form. The tabletop role-playing game, Call of Cthulhu, first published by Chaosium in 1981, deserves renewed attention for how it translated Lovecraft's ideas into mechanical systems. The game's sanity mechanic made knowledge literally dangerous. Investigating mysteries required accumulating information, but information caused permanent sanity loss. Characters who learned too much inevitably went insane. This created a built-in tragedy. Successful investigators were doomed. The game encouraged players to create backup characters because their primary characters would eventually become unplayable due to accumulated mental trauma. Music has engaged with cosmic horror more obliquely. Metal bands, particularly in the death metal and black metal subgenres, frequently reference Lovecraftian imagery and themes. Metallica's The Call of Cthulhu, 1984, presented an instrumental interpretation of cosmic dread. The H.P. Lovecraft Historical Society produces music in period-appropriate styles. 1920s jazz standards rewritten with Lovecraftian lyrics, creating uncanny juxtaposition between familiar musical forms and disturbing content. Cryo Chamber, a dark ambient music label founded in 2012, specializes in albums explicitly inspired by cosmic horror. These compositions use drones, field recordings, and minimal melodic content to evoke vast, empty spaces and inhuman presences. Albums like Cthulhu, 2014, and Azathoth, 2015, attempt sonic translation of Lovecraft's entities, not by depicting them directly, but by creating soundscapes suggesting their presence. The music functions as atmospheric rather than narrative, emphasizing mood and implication over explicit representation. What these varied adaptations reveal is that cosmic horror translates most successfully when creators embrace its fundamental principles rather than its surface elements. Tentacles and ancient tomes are recognizable Lovecraftian signifiers, but they are not cosmic horror's essence. The essence is radical destabilization of reality, identity, knowledge, and meaning. Media that capture this destabilization, regardless of whether they explicitly reference Lovecraft, succeed as cosmic horror. Media that merely borrow his imagery while maintaining conventional narrative structures produce something else entirely. Cosmic horror's cultural reach extends far beyond explicit adaptations into academic discourse, subcultural identity formation, and philosophical appropriation. This diffusion has transformed Lovecraft's fiction from pulp entertainment into a conceptual framework through which contemporary anxieties are articulated and examined. Academic engagement with Lovecraft accelerated significantly in the 1980s and 1990s. S.T. Joshi's biography, H.P. Lovecraft, A Life, 1996, established definitive biographical scholarship, while his critical works argued for Lovecraft's literary significance beyond genre fiction. Joshi positioned Lovecraft as a philosophical writer whose cosmic materialism produced genuinely innovative fiction, comparable to Poe in influence and technique. This scholarly legitimation opened space for serious critical engagement. Literary scholars have examined cosmic horror through various theoretical lenses. Maurice Lévy's Lovecraft, A Study in the Fantastic, 1988, applied Todorovian fantasy theory, arguing that Lovecraft's work operates at the boundary between marvelous and uncanny. China Miéville, himself a prominent weird fiction author, has written extensively on Lovecraft's politics and aesthetics, particularly in his introduction to At the Mountains of Madness. Miéville argues that Lovecraft's reactionary politics and his cosmic horror are inseparable. Both stem from his anxiety about contamination, mixing, and boundary dissolution. This raises uncomfortable questions about engaging with Lovecraft's legacy. His racism was not incidental, but virulent and pervasive. His letters contain horrifying descriptions of immigrants and non-white people. Stories like The Horror at Red Hook and He are explicitly xenophobic, depicting New York's ethnic diversity as nightmarish degeneration. The Street fantasizes about Anglo-Saxon buildings literally destroying immigrant neighborhoods. Even The Shadow over Innsmouth, often considered one of his best works, is transparently about miscegenation anxiety. The horror of discovering you have non-human ancestry. Contemporary scholarship grapples with this legacy in various ways. Some argue for separating Lovecraft's biography from his literary innovations, claiming cosmic horror's philosophical content transcends his personal bigotry. Others insist his racism is constitutive of cosmic horror itself, that the genre's anxiety about forbidden knowledge and dangerous contact replicates colonialist fears of cultural contamination. Victor Laval's The Ballad of Black Tom, 2016, a novella retelling the horror at Red Hook from the perspective of a black protagonist, demonstrates how writers of color are reclaiming and critiquing Lovecraftian horror by foregrounding what his original stories marginalized. Philosophical appropriation of cosmic horror has intensified in recent decades, particularly within speculative realism and object-oriented ontology. These philosophical movements emerged in the 2000s, challenging anthropocentric frameworks and human-centered epistemology. Graham, Harman's Weird Realism, Lovecraft and Philosophy, 2012, argues that Lovecraft's fiction enacts a genuinely realist philosophy, one that insists reality exists independently of human perception, and that objects possess depths we cannot fully access. Eugene Thacker's In the Dust of This Planet, 2011, part of his Horror of Philosophy trilogy, uses cosmic horror as a conceptual framework for thinking about what he calls the world without us, the planet as it exists beyond human utility or comprehension. Thacker argues that cosmic horror provides vocabulary for articulating ecological and existential anxieties that conventional philosophy struggles to address. His work became unexpectedly influential beyond academia when the musician Lil B wore a shirt featuring the book's cover, introducing Thacker's philosophy to hip-hop audiences. This crossover illustrates cosmic horror's penetration into subcultural spaces. Online communities devoted to doomer philosophy, pessimistic, often nihilistic perspectives on contemporary society, frequently reference cosmic horror imagery and concepts. The aesthetic combines Lovecraftian entities with late capitalist alienation, environmental collapse, and technological acceleration. Cosmic indifferentism provides language for expressing feelings of powerlessness in the face of systemic forces, climate change, automation, algorithmic control, that operate beyond individual agency. The New Weird literary movement, emerging in the 1990s and 2000s, demonstrated how cosmic horror could be updated for contemporary concerns. Writers like China Miéville, Jeff Vandermeer, and N.K. Jemisin adopted Lovecraft's techniques, incomprehensible entities, reality distortion, forbidden knowledge, while explicitly rejecting his politics. Vandermeer's Southern Reach trilogy, 2014, depicts an environmental anomaly called Area X that transforms everything it touches according to incomprehensible principles. The novels explore ecological horror, the recognition that nature is not benevolent or balanced, but alien and potentially hostile to human existence. Thomas Ligotti represents perhaps the purest contemporary extension of Lovecraft's philosophical pessimism. His short story collection, Songs of a Dead Dreamer, 1985, and philosophical work, The Conspiracy Against the Human Race, 2010, elaborate cosmic horror's bleakest implications. Ligotti argues seriously for philosophical pessimism and antinatalism, claiming consciousness itself is a biological mistake and existence is suffering without redemption. His fiction treats these claims not as abstract philosophy, but as lived horror, the terrible recognition that being aware is being trapped. Academic work on cosmic horror has also examined its relationship to scientific discovery. Timothy Morton's Hyperobjects, 2013, uses cosmic horror as an analytic framework for understanding phenomena like climate change and radiation. Things so massively distributed in time and space that humans cannot directly perceive them, yet which shape our reality fundamentally. Morton argues that cosmic horror's techniques for representing the unrepresentable offer tools for thinking about ecological catastrophe. The appropriation extends into unexpected domains. Architecture theorists have examined Lovecraft's non-Euclidean geometries as challenges to humanist architectural assumptions. Digital artists create Lovecraftian images using AI algorithms, producing visuals that capture cosmic horror's wrongness through computational rather than authorial means. These images circulate widely online, creating new visual vocabularies for cosmic dread independent of Lovecraft's original literary descriptions. Popular science communication has occasionally adopted cosmic horror framings when discussing genuinely unsettling discoveries. Articles about the universe's accelerating expansion, dark matter and dark energy comprising most of cosmic mass, or the possibility of vacuum, decay that could annihilate all matter often employ Lovecraftian language, cosmic horror, eldritch physics, incomprehensible vastness. This represents cosmic horror feeding back into the scientific discourse that originally inspired it, creating a strange loop where fiction influences how we describe reality. The internet's role in cosmic horror's subcultural spread cannot be overstated. Platforms like Reddit host communities devoted to Lovecraftian horror, with subreddits analyzing stories, sharing original fiction, and cataloging cosmic horror in various media. The SCP Foundation, mentioned earlier, originated on 4chan's/X/paranormal board and became a massive collaborative project with thousands of entries. Creepypasta communities regularly produce Lovecraftian narratives, demonstrating that cosmic horror's basic techniques, documentary framing, accumulating dread, ambiguous revelation, remain productive for generating effective horror. This subcultural appropriation has made cosmic horror's aesthetics and concepts available to audiences far beyond Lovecraft's original readership. Someone unfamiliar with the Call of Cthulhu might still recognize Cthulhu imagery, understand references to forbidden knowledge and sanity loss, or appreciate cosmic insignificance as a theme. Cosmic horror has become part of cultural literacy, a shared vocabulary for expressing particular anxieties about knowledge, reality, and human meaning. The persistence of cosmic horror for over a century demands explanation. Why does this particular mode of horror, philosophical rather than visceral, emphasizing insignificance rather than threat, continue resonating across different cultural contexts and media? The answer lies in cosmic horror's unusual relationship to fundamental human anxieties and its capacity to articulate experiences that resist conventional expression. First, cosmic horror addresses what might be called existential vertigo, the psychological disorientation that follows from genuinely comprehending our position in the universe. Modern astronomy reveals a cosmos of staggering scale. The observable universe contains approximately 200 billion galaxies, each containing hundreds of billions of stars. Earth orbits an unremarkable star in an ordinary galaxy. The universe is approximately 13.8 billion years old. Human civilization emerged roughly 10,000 years ago. Our entire history occupies 0.0007% of cosmic time. These are not abstract statistics, but actual conditions of human existence. We evolved to navigate human-scale environments, forests, plains, social groups numbering dozens or hundreds. We have no intuitive capacity to grasp billions of years or trillions of kilometers. When we attempt to truly comprehend cosmic scale, something in cognition falters. Cosmic horror provides narrative form to this faltering. It suggests that such comprehension would not merely humble us, but destroy us, that our minds are structurally incapable of processing these truths without breaking. Second, cosmic horror articulates anxieties about epistemological reliability. How do we know what we know? Can we trust our perceptions? Are our cognitive categories adequate to reality? These philosophical questions became newly urgent in the early 20th century as physics revealed counterintuitive truths. Particles behaving as waves, time being relative, light bending around massive objects. Lovecraft wrote during a period when scientific discovery was actively destabilizing common sense understanding of reality. Contemporary developments intensify these anxieties. Quantum mechanics suggests reality at fundamental scales operates according to principles that violate everyday experience. Neuroscience demonstrates that consciousness is assembled from disparate processes, that our sense of unified selfhood is a construction. Cognitive psychology reveals countless biases and heuristics that distort perception. We have significant evidence that our understanding of reality is mediated, limited, and frequently wrong. Cosmic horror says, what if the actual truth is worse than merely counterintuitive? What if it is incompatible with human sanity? Third, cosmic horror engages with the specific terror of meaninglessness in a post-religious context. Traditional religions provided cosmic narratives in which humans mattered. We were created with purpose. Our choices had eternal significance. The universe contained moral structure. Modernity progressively dismantled these narratives. Evolution revealed humans as one lineage among millions, not specially created. Cosmology demonstrated the universe does not require intention or design to exist. We can describe cosmic history from the Big Bang forward without invoking purpose anywhere. This is liberating for some people, but psychologically devastating for others. Cosmic horror dramatizes this devastation. It presents a universe that operates according to its own principles, indifferent to human welfare or meaning. Traditional horror often contained implicit morality. The guilty were punished. The innocent sometimes saved. Evil could be defeated. Cosmic horror offers no such comfort. The universe does not care if you are virtuous. Your suffering is not meaningful. Your death changes nothing cosmically significant. Fourth, cosmic horror addresses anxieties about knowledge and progress. The Enlightenment project assumed that increasing knowledge leads to human flourishing. Science would reveal natural laws we could exploit for benefit. Understanding the world would make us safer, more capable, more fulfilled. The 20th century complicated this narrative significantly. Scientific advancement produced nuclear weapons, industrial pollution, algorithmic manipulation. Knowledge enabled new forms of suffering and control. Cosmic horror suggests the darkest possibility, that some knowledge is actively harmful, that understanding certain truths damages the understander. This is not anti-intellectualism, but a terrifying inversion of intellectualism. It claims that curiosity can be lethal, that investigation can be self-destructive, that the examined life might be unbearable. In an era where information overload and technological acceleration create genuine psychological distress, this premise resonates uncomfortably. Fifth, cosmic horror provides conceptual tools for thinking about systemic forces beyond individual control. Late capitalism, climate change, algorithmic governance, global supply chains. These are systems so vast and complex that no single person comprehends them fully, yet they shape every aspect of existence. They operate according to principles that seem alien to human values. Profit maximization, efficiency optimization, carbon cycle feedback loops. These are not moral considerations, but mechanical processes that continue regardless of human preference. Mark Fisher's concept of capitalist realism, the widespread sense that capitalism is the only possible economic system, that imagining alternatives is literally impossible, has been connected to cosmic horror's fatalism. Fisher himself drew on Lovecraft in his work, recognizing that cosmic horror's depiction of inescapable, incomprehensible forces mirrors late capitalism's psychological effects. The old ones returning regardless of human resistance parallels ecological collapse proceeding despite awareness of its causes. Sixth, cosmic horror's treatment of identity dissolution speaks to contemporary anxieties about selfhood. Stories like The Shadow over Innsmouth or The Thing on the Doorstep depict protagonists discovering they are not who they thought they were. They are partially alien, possessed by other entities, or losing themselves to transformation. This metaphor has obvious resonance for discussions about identity, particularly in contexts where identity categories are understood as constructed rather than essential. If the self is not fixed but fluid, what prevents it from dissolving entirely? Seventh, cosmic horror's emphasis on the body as a site of horror connects to contemporary body anxieties. Lovecraft's creatures often combine familiar biological forms in wrong ways. Tentacles where limbs should be, eyes in inappropriate locations, textures that should not exist in living tissue. This body horror reflects deep discomfort with materiality itself, with the recognition that we are flesh subject to transformation, decay, and forces beyond conscious control. In an era of genetic engineering, viral pandemics, and AI integration with biological systems, these anxieties intensify. The philosophical implications extend to cosmic horror's challenge to anthropocentric thinking. Environmental philosophy and animal ethics have increasingly questioned whether human interests should automatically be prioritized over other species or ecosystems. Cosmic horror takes this further, suggesting not merely that we should consider non-human perspectives, but that those perspectives might be radically incompatible with ours. The old ones do not hate humanity. They simply operate according to principles where human welfare is irrelevant. This is deep ecology taken to its logical extreme. The recognition that nature is not designed for human flourishing and might be fundamentally indifferent or hostile to our existence. Cosmic horror also speaks to experiences of trauma and dissociation. Characters in Lovecraft's stories frequently experience fragmented consciousness, missing time, memories that may or may not be real, and the sense that their identity has been compromised. These phenomenological descriptions closely match trauma symptoms. The genre provides narrative form to experiences of reality becoming unstable, of not being able to trust one's own mind, of knowing something terrible but being unable to articulate it coherently. Trauma survivors have reported finding cosmic horror oddly validating. It takes seriously the experience of having one's reality shattered by encounter with something unbearable. The enduring appeal of cosmic horror, then, is not despite its bleakness, but because of it. The genre provides vocabulary and narrative structures for anxieties that resist conventional articulation. It takes seriously the possibility that existence might be fundamentally absurd, that consciousness might be a cosmic accident, that knowledge might be dangerous, and that meaning might be purely human invention, unsupported by any cosmic order. For people experiencing these anxieties, cosmic horror offers not comfort, but acknowledgement, the recognition that these fears are not personal failures, but reasonable responses to actual conditions. This is perhaps cosmic horror's most profound achievement. It transformed philosophical pessimism into compelling narrative. Lovecraft took positions that could be stated abstractly: materialism, cosmic indifference, human insignificance, and made them felt experiences. His stories do not argue for these positions. They immerse readers in what it would be like if they were true. The effectiveness of cosmic horror as horror depends on the reader's suspicion that they might be true, that the universe Lovecraft describes might resemble the actual universe more closely than we find comfortable admitting. Contemporary cosmic horror continues this project, adapting Lovecraft's techniques to new anxieties while often rejecting his reactionary politics. The genre has proven remarkably flexible, capable of addressing diverse concerns: ecological catastrophe, technological acceleration, systemic oppression, identity dissolution, while maintaining its core premise: that reality is stranger and more terrible than consensus understanding suggests, and that confronting this truth has psychological costs. Cosmic horror's persistence suggests it fulfills some cultural function beyond entertainment. It serves as a kind of secular negative theology, a way of thinking about ultimate questions without recourse to religious frameworks. Where traditional theology offers meaning, cosmic horror offers meaninglessness. Where religion provides comfort, cosmic horror provides existential dread. Yet both engage seriously with fundamental questions about existence, consciousness, and humanity's place in reality. Cosmic horror is what you get when you ask those questions from a position of strict materialism and follow the implications without flinching. The genre's future seems assured as long as science continues revealing the universe's strangeness, and human institutions continue producing feelings of powerlessness and alienation. Each generation rediscovers cosmic horror and finds it speaks to their particular moment. The specific anxiety shift, from nuclear annihilation to climate collapse, from racial degeneration to algorithmic control. But the underlying structure remains. We are small. The Iwi universe is vast and indifferent. Knowledge is dangerous, and meaning is fragile. Lovecraft died believing his work would be forgotten, his stories destined for the same obscurity that claimed most pulp fiction. Instead, cosmic horror became one of the 20th century's most influential literary innovations, reshaping how we think about horror, reality, and human significance. The shadow he identified, that cold, vast shadow of cosmic insignificance, has not diminished but grown longer, darker, and more culturally pervasive. It has become, as he might have appreciated, inescapable. The stars are always right. The old ones wait, patient and inevitable, in the depths of imagination and anxiety. And we, having learned what cannot be unlearned, continue living as best we can under that shadow's weight.